Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Lars Haukeland and I'm getting ready to record video number 2 in the series of 5 videos on the prodigal son. Now, the prodigal son is from Luke chapter 15, and I realize that this is probably not a correct title. My working title for this, when I studied this and wrote it up and did it in Norwegian, was The Two Sons. Because there's not just one son here. There's not just the prodigal son. There's also a different son, which really was the reason for the story in the first place. So I think that when we just talk about the prodigal son, we're kind of like missing the picture here. We're not getting everything that Jesus meant for us to understand. Now, we're in Luke chapter 15. We're looking at verse 11 through 32, which is out the chapter. And we cannot forget that this is a story that Jesus told in the Middle East, and the Middle East has a different culture from our Western culture. And some things that Jesus intended for the Pharisees and scribes to hear, we don't understand unless we study it properly. Also, this happened 2,000 years ago. Now, maybe on a farm in the Middle East, life hasn't changed that much in the last 2,000 years. Then again, maybe it has, but the thing is that it was a different time, a different place, and we have to understand some about these times and these places before we can be able to understand what Jesus was really trying to say here. This is a story that really illustrates God's great love, and that is true even if you just look at the prodigal son, but even looking at the entire story. Now, Jesus was attacking the Pharisees and the scribes here. We see that in verse number 1 and verse number 2 of chapter 15. Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes did not like that. It says, and the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. So they were not happy that Jesus was keeping company with the sinners. And we all are sinners, so we should be happy that he actually wants to spend time with us sinners. But this story was an attack on the Pharisees. Now, he told 3 stories in this chapter. He told about the lost sheep and how they rejoiced finding that lost sheep. And he told about a coin that was lost, and the joy that this woman had when she actually found her coin. Now, again, don't know if I said anything about this in the first video, but this is probably a coin that she had on her wedding garment, on her veil. Then that could be used for difficult times later on. It was not just any coin. They didn't have a lot of coins really in the Middle East at this time, but this was probably part of a wedding present that she got, and it was very special to her, so she rejoiced when she found it. And then Jesus comes with this story about the lost son, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. All this makes up Luke chapter 15. And in this story, we have not just the prodigal son, we have 3 people in there. We have the father, we have the older son, and we have the younger son. And we see God's joy over a repentant sinner here in this story. Also, in the other stories, we see that it says in verse number 7, I say unto you, that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, moreover 99 just persons which need no repentance. So Jesus was trying here to tell the Pharisees and scribes how precious sinners was to God, and how much he loves the sinner, and they just did not understand this. Now, so there are three parts to this story. You got the story of the youngest son, say verses 11 through 16, roughly. Then we have the father, which we read about mostly in verses 17 through 24. Then we have the older son, which is from verse 25 and out the chapter. Now, I went through some points, 4 points actually, last video, the first video. I looked at the request, the shameful request, where the prodigal son, or the younger son, comes to the father and basically he says, I wish you were dead, because the only way he could receive inheritance was if he was dead. So he basically wished him dead. And we see the shameful response that the father had, that the Pharisee did not like, because he actually gave in to the request that the younger son had. Then we saw the rebellion when he went and spent his money. He blew all the money on feasting and harlots, and the Pharisees were just shocked about this story that Jesus was telling them. This was shameful. It's the most shameful story that the Pharisees ever knew. And last time, when we were going through video number 1, we left the younger son with the pigs eating pig slop, basically. That's where we got. So we will continue. And for those of you wondering if I'm drinking washing up liquid, it's actually not. It's actually pop. It's Pepsi Max Electric. Yeah. So it's I'm not drinking washing up fluid here. Okay, so we get in. We can read the verses here, so we get up to speed. We start in verse number 11, where Jesus said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly of the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. Pardon me. These verses we looked at in video number 1, and if you want some commentary on these verses, you need to watch video number 1 if you haven't already. But this is a fairly familiar story. We know about the prodigal son. We don't know as much about the father and the older son, but we will get into that after a while. So this is part number 1 on about the father. So we're going on from this shameful request, response, and rebellion, and we're going to look at a shameful reception. So the younger son, as we leave him, he's about to die of starvation, and this is something that we have problems imagining, because it's rare that we in the Western world has to go without food. Even if we run out of money, we have food stations, we have places we can go if we are in need and in want. And to be quite honest, some of us have way too much instead of way too little. So it's not a problem that we can fully understand, but this is the end of the road for this young son. We come to verse number 17, and it says there, and when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger. So he was really, really hungry, and he remembers that he has a generous father at home. Now, when he talks about the rented the hired servants. These are servants that are rented for a day. The mistheos in the Greek means a day worker. So this is, if you go to Matthew chapter 20, this is the story about these poor people that are standing on the corner hoping that somebody will give them a little bit of work. They are absolutely the lowest of the low. They are really beneath slaves, and they don't come with a college degree. They are unskilled. They are just poor. They're just hoping that some generous soul will give them a little bit of work so they can just get enough food to fill their bellies. This is what he's talking about. So the father was a generous person because he was generous towards them. Says that how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to and to spare. So they had food to spare. He didn't just give them what they needed to live on. He gave them actually more than what they needed, because they were supposed to be paid daily. If you go to Leviticus in chapter 19, see Leviticus chapter 19 and verse number 13, it says there, "Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him of the wages of him that is hired, and shall not abide with thee all night until the morning." So they should give the wages to the people that work, and you give it on a daily basis. They work for one day, they get the wages for one day. This is the way the Leviticus says that, the law says this is the way it should do. The poor one, they need the food straight away, so you should do that. Give them the pay as soon as you can. Now, the father did more than what the law demanded. Now, the son remembers the generosity, the love, and the kindness that his father is showing. Not only him, but, all the people that works for him. And the son wanted to be a hired servant. Again, this is the same word, that he wanted to be a hired servant, just a day worker, just to get enough food to survive. Now, these hired servants could not negotiate any pay. They just took whatever they could get. They did a job and just hoped that whatever they got was enough to make them survive to another day. So the son here has reached rock bottom. He had no choice the way he saw it. He had to humble himself, and he had to face the shame of what he had done. Now the son hoped to be met with the same mercy and compassion that the day workers of his fathers was met with. Maybe if he worked long enough, he could earn back what he had squandered and be accepted by his family again. But that was a big maybe. Now the Pharisees, they were listening to this story, and he says, if he really repents, he can go to the Father, he can be humiliated, he can be scorned, he can be shamed, and then he can work to regain his Father's trust. And this was Judaism. It was all about work. It was the law. It was working and doing what the law says. And basically, this is what all religions are saying. You work to earn your salvation. And this is what the Pharisees were teaching, and this is what they thought was right. Now, don't forget, they had already had a funeral for the younger son. I told you that it was customary when somebody left the family in that way that the young son did, that they had a funeral in the village, just to say that, he's left, he don't want anything to do with us, he is dead, he's not part of the family anymore, he is gone. As far as they were concerned, he was dead. We read that in verse number 24 and 32. 24 says, "For this my son was dead and is alive again." And also in verse number 32, "For this thy brother was dead and is alive again." So they considered the young son as dead because of the rebellion he had done against his family and against his father and even against the village, because the village was closely knit together. Now he was ready, the younger son. He was ready. He was broken. He was alone. He was sad. He was repentant. He was hungry. He had nowhere to go. And he puts his trust in the Father and believes in his Father's goodness, generosity, and grace. Does that sound familiar to you? I would think it does. Verse number 18. He says, "I will arise and go to my father, and I will say unto you, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and I am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants." All right, now this is the son's plan. This is the son's confession, okay? He comes to his senses. He says in verse number 17, it says, when he came to himself, he finally got to his senses, and he even got to his senses. Even if he's talking to himself, he's still getting to his senses. Now, if you talk to yourself, it doesn't mean you're crazy. Listen, I work at a psychiatric hospital. Talking to yourself doesn't mean you're crazy, okay? Just know this. But, he saw no other solution to his problem. He had lost all his rights. He had nothing really to bank on. And he says that he will come and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. He will say, I have sinned against heaven. Not just against the Father, but against heaven. Now, in the Greek it says, eis to uranion, or uranon. This means actually into heaven. He has sinned into heaven. And I think this could be a reflection on what Ezra wrote in chapter 9 and verse 6. It says there, and said, O my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift up my face to thee, my God, for our iniquities are increased over our head, and our trespass is grown up unto heaven. This, I think, is what the young son is talking about. He holds nothing back. He shows real repentance. He denies himself completely, and he's admitting that my life is a failure. I stand close to death, and I cannot blame anyone but myself. I rebelled, I wasted my life, I brought shame upon my father, and my sins go all the way up to heaven. That's how big his sin was. It went all the way up to heaven, all the way into heaven. So he makes no excuses. He says, I'm guilty as charged. But, he makes no excuses, but he trusts in his Father's love. Now, he has to go back to get away from sin. Now, any sinner that comes back to God takes full responsibility for their sin and sees their life, how should I say, they see their sin reach all the way to heaven. That's how we see it. Our sins go all the way to heaven, and when we stand before God. Now, the Jews taught that they needed to work, like in other religions. They had to work for their salvation. You even find that in cults today. Like they have to work, or else they're not worthy of their salvation. That God would receive you only if you did the necessary work. The sinner had no rights. He wasted it all when he left God. And the Jews' view was that he would never be a son again. This is what the Pharisees would have thought. Now, the son realized that he was dead. The son did not expect to be taken back into the family. Hence, he said that he wanted to be like a hired servant. The son wanted to work for his pay. That's what he's taught as a Jew. That's what tradition and culture is telling you. Now, here the Pharisees and the scribes were probably applauding. They were happy now at this point of the story. This is only right and proper that he would want to do this. They had not liked the story so far. It was just shameful, shameful, shameful. And now, suddenly, yes, something is right with this story. They had not liked what they had heard. The sun had sunk as low as humanly possible, and the bottom of the bottomest bottom, you could say, is, when the young son was in the pig pen. That was the lowest point of his life. But they liked it that the son had reached his senses. The son was regretting, and he was coming to receive his punishment, and they thought this was correct. The son wants to work to receive forgiveness. They also thought that this was correct. The son is willing to be excluded from the family, and they thought, yes, that is correct. But the rebellion in this young man's life is definitely over by now. Now, not all sinners are as bad as this young son. Not all sinners spend money on prostitutes. Not all sinners go and live like this young man did. Okay, this story, you could say, it's extreme, and Jesus makes it extreme to make a point. The sinner has to come humbly to the Father. The sinner must confess without excuse. The sinner must be willing to do whatever is needed to restore the relationship with God. This is talking about attitude, not about works. It's talking about attitude, okay? Now, he resembles the servant in Matthew chapter 11 who said, "Let me work and I will pay it all back." But this was a typical religious response for the Jew. But this man in Matthew 18, he owed 10,000 talents. That's a lot of money, okay? And it was just impossible, unless you were rich, and you wouldn't be in that predicament anyway. But unless you were rich, there was no way you could afford to pay back 10,000 talents in a lifetime, okay? But this is real regret, just wanting to do it. It's just that we are not able to do it. We're not able to pay back what we owe for the sin that we have committed. There's no way we can do that. And God knows that, and we know that. So now I come to this fourth point in this series. It's a shameful reception. In verse number 20, it says, "And he," that's the father, the son, the young son, the young son arose and came to his father. But when he was a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Now, let me tell you a few things, what I see in these stuff here. Now, the Pharisees, they just fell off their seats when they heard this. Finally, things were going the way that they wanted to hear. But then the father just breaks off, and he comes with this shameful reception of the young son. And what really amazes them is that they don't understand why. Why would the father do something like that? They didn't understand about God's love. No father should behave so shamefully, according to the Pharisees and scribes. Now, the sinner wants a new start in life, okay? He needs his father. He needs his father's resources. The father can give life instead of death. The father has goodness, he has kindness, and he has forgiveness to give. Now, The father in this story has been disgraced. The Pharisees expected that the father would refuse to see the son straight away. He would make him simmer for a few days, kind of like get ready, and get into the right humble kind of spirit. And the Pharisees expected that also the village would publicly humiliate him, maybe even spit on him and beat him. What do you call them things? You put them in stocks, and they stay there with their heads through the wood there, and their arms. Can't remember what that's called. But they're probably, if they had one of them, they use that on him, just to publicly humiliate him. And the Pharisees expected that the father would give him a cold treatment, would give him cold shoulder, just say, okay, so you're back. And normally that's what would happen. They would be offish towards the son that had treated them with so much disrespect. The Pharisees also expected that the son would bend down and kiss his father's feet all the way to the ground. That's a sign of humiliation, sign of submission, that they bend down and kiss somebody's feet. They're saying that, I'm just throwing myself at your mercy. That's what the Pharisees would expect. Now, the rabbis taught that remorse was work that a man does to earn God's favor. But that's what the New Testament teaches us. After humiliation and hard work, they would let him work with a shed of dignity, you could say, because he was like, at this point, when he comes home to his father, the son is like, he's lower than the lows. Even the hired help that were lower than the slaves, he would even be lower than them. He was trying to get up to that lowest of low level. So this is an amazing story. And that is what you would expect, that he would just throw himself at his father's mercy, at the village's mercy, just come and say, I messed up. What can I do to make it right? But that is not what happened. The father saw him far away. Now that tells me that the father was looking for him. He was hoping that one day he would appear in the distance, and he ran and threw himself round his neck and kissed him, So I imagine it must have been daylight, or else he couldn't have seen him afar off. But he had compassion for his son, and he ran to meet him. Now, this is a very important point, because he ran to save him from the shame, and he was willing to hear the people say, what is he doing? Why is he running? He was a noble man. He wanted to save his son from the humiliation, and he was kind of getting humiliated himself. He wanted to save his son from ridicule, and his son came straight from the pig pen. He was probably dirty. He was probably smelly. So, But he said that his father had compassion on him. What it means from the Greek, it says that his guts got twisted, because it hurts in his stomach. What it actually means is to have the bowels yearn. Now, that is some serious compassion, folks. It really is. And the father was just had such strong feelings for his youngest son that he just had to run to greet him. Now, I've said this a few times in my Norwegian videos. I can't remember if I said them in the English, but in the Hebrew, when you're talking about thoughts, you talk about the heart. For us in the Western world, the heart is the picture of feelings, but it's the kidneys or the intestines or basically the bowels. That is the seat of the feelings in the Jewish tradition, and it comes to where you feel that that it's turning inside you. It's like you feel so strong that it actually hurts in your insides. That is what it is. But of course, the Bible says that as the man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So it thinks when it's talk about the heart, it's more talking about the reasoning part of man. But anyway, let's move on then till this father running to meet his son. Now, nobles in the Middle East, they did not run. Dramon means running in a stadium, means running on a track. So when his father was running, he was not running he was not just jogging. He was running full speed. He sprinted. And nobles, they had long robes that they were wearing. And both men and women that were nobles would wear these. And no one could run with these robes on unless they lifted them up so that they didn't stumble in them. They lifted up their robes. And when they lifted up their robes, that would show their legs. And showing their legs in public would be humiliating. They had these outer capes, you could say, or robes then, the Mekabedeth. And the Mekabedeth in the Greek actually means what brings me honor. It means what brings me honor. And this is something that is not just in the Middle East, but also in some of the Arabic countries. The Arabic Bible actually in here, he said that he hurried to meet his son. But in 1860, they changed it into he ran, because it's important here that he ran, he sprinted, he ran, and he burned rubber. He just went as quickly as possible. Now you could ask yourself, a lot of questions here. You could say, why does God run? Why does he bring shame to himself? God takes the shame and he protects the son. He takes the back talk, the ridicule, so that the son doesn't have to suffer through it. He embraces the dirty, smelly sinner, and he doesn't suffer in silence any longer. Now, everyone knows how much the Father loves the Son. The Father puts his Son to shame. He brings his Son's shame upon himself. The Son is restored before he reaches the village. I know I'm going a bit back and forth there from that, but then it says that he kissed him. Now, remember I told you that really it was the son that was supposed to bend down and kiss the father's feet. Well, here it is, the father that throws himself around his neck and kisses him. And he embraces the sinner joyfully. And the son that is ready to kiss the father's feet, but instead it's the father that kisses him and kisses his head. So there is an important picture here, being willing to humiliate oneself, where God comes and meets us and gives us honor. Now, there were several kisses here. He kissed him again and again, and this is the cultural evidence of acceptance, friendship, restoration, and forgiveness. So this is talking about how the Father received the Son when he came back. So this is revolutionary. This is radical. The Father humbles himself because of his deep love for his Son. And He comes to the village, he runs to meet his son, he throws himself around the neck of this dirty, stinky son, and reunion happened through mercy. This was shocking to the Pharisees when they heard this. They thought that work was the way to receive forgiveness from God. Then we come to verse number 21, and it says, The son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and I am no more worthy to be called thy son. Now, he had already thought about what he was going to say, but if you notice, there was something missing here. He didn't talk about being the hired servant anymore, and there is a reason for that. He had already received mercy from his father in the way that he met him. He had already been forgiven in the way that his father met him. He had already been taken back because of the way that his father met him there. And he has true remorse and true faith in his father and his mercy. All the sinner has to do is to come with remorseful heart and trust in God. Then God will run to meet him or her and throw himself round your neck. The Father has come down from the holiest of holy, you could say, from the holiest, from way up in heaven, to the village of humility. And he has done that for you and for me. Now, work would be an insult to the grace of God and to the Father's love, because God doesn't ask you to work for your salvation, because there's no way you could do it yourself. You're not worthy of that. You can never earn your salvation. It is a free gift from God. So we have seen a shameful request. We have seen a shameful response. We have seen a shameful rebellion. And we'll see now a shameful reception. In the next video, we're going to keep looking at the Father. That's part 2 on the Father. And we're going to see a shameful reconciliation, which is where the Father makes a big party for the younger son. I hope you have enjoyed this video. This is video number 2 of 5 videos in all about the prodigal son. If you want to watch any more videos that I have recorded, feel free to go to revlarsvideos.wordpress.com. That's it. I'm finished for now. May God be with you till we meet again.